So the next thing is to put these together as a daily practice. As you recall, one of the things that we talked about was after we go through these individually, that we would combine them together in a way that we could use it as a daily practice. That is, it becomes preliminary to whatever other practice that we're going to do for that day in a very condensed version. So let me pass these out and we'll take a look at these. And this is a slightly modified version of a practice that was written by His Holiness Dujam Rinpoche, who was head of the Nyingma lineage for quite a period of time. And so you can see it's very, very close to what we've been doing, but it's simplified a little bit and focuses primarily on the mantra aspects. So it starts, homage to Samattabhadra and Samattabhadri, because I suffer due to my own actions and I now have this precious human life. Without knowing when I will die, I will now engage in virtuous actions for the benefit of all sentient beings with joy and devotion. Now you notice this is the four immeasurables. Okay? Because I suffer, suffering, due to my own actions, karma. I now have this precious human life, self-explanatory. Without knowing when I will die, impermanence. Okay? So those are
the four immeasurables, the four thoughts that change.
Four thoughts. I'm sorry. The four thoughts.
This is the four immeasurables because I do the four immeasurables.
The four thoughts.
After refuge tree all the time.
The four thoughts that turn to mind.
The mind.
Yes. Okay. So the common ngondro.
Yeah.
And so then, therefore, and we visualize the refuge tree and do those with prostrations. Now, if you're doing this as a preliminary practice, you can do that. If you have the time, it's always good to do the prostrations, but if you don't have the time, it's okay not to do them, just imagine them. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, in order to enable all sentient beings to attain enlightenment. So the first part is the actual refuge, the second part is the bodhicitta. And then Vajrasattva and Vajratopa appear above me, purifying me and all beings and phenomena with nectar from their place of their union. So we visualize that. And we recite, in this case, just the short mantra, Om Benzasattva Hong. Now, it is said that if you do this 28 times in a 24-hour period, it purifies all of the negative obscurations that you've accumulated during that period. Hence the 28. But it's also good to use a mala and do the full 108 if you have the time to do that. And I would add that if you actually have the time, it would be good to recite the full mantra at least once before you do the short mantra as well. And then we reappear as Vajrasattva and Vajratopa. And everything is now a perfect Buddha field, and we recite the offering. And we use the mudra, the hand mudra, and recite the offering mudra here. Om Guru Dewa Dikini Ratna Mandala Pratissoha. Just one time. And then we visualize the refuge tree again and recite the Guru Rinpoche mantra, Oma Hong Benzo Guru Pema Siddhi Hong, as many times as you can. We do the 4 empowerment visualization. And then, by the merit of this practice, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings 3 times. So you can see that if you really don't have much time, you can still work this in. It literally can be done in about 60 seconds if that's all you've got. So typically, of course, you want to do it much longer than that, but it can be done in a very short period of time, which is to say, no excuses. You can't get away by saying, I don't have time anymore. If you've got 60 seconds somewhere in your day, you can work this in. So that, of course, is not ideal. We would much rather that you have a longer period of time for doing the meditation, because as I have mentioned already, we're talking about training the mind, and doing this in just a 60-second period of time is not going to do a whole lot for training the mind. So certainly we would like you to be doing more of this than that. But it makes a very nice segue into the practice. Now, many practices will have elements of this in them, the longer practices when we get into the deity yoga practices. But a lot of times they'll be missing a piece or two of that. So it's kind of nice to have this where you can put in the complete set of the ngondro practices as a way of leading into your everyday practice as a part of that. So this handout, the signs of accomplishment of the ngondro and more, I added there because as we go through it, it really goes through the entire path, if you will. But I wanted to end this part of the class by looking at some things that you could use as indicators. Now, don't look at these as rigid rules because they're not, but it's a way of looking through some things, and there are many, many different forms of guidelines in terms of where we are in our practice, and this is just one of those. And it can be helpful as long as you don't look at it too literally and assume that this is the magic list of what you need to do and so forth. But if you look at it more broadly as just a list of helpful guidelines, then in fact it can be quite helpful. So I wanted to go through these today as part of the end of this part of the course. If you can devote your body unstingily to the practice, that is a sign of taking to heart the preciousness of the freedoms and advantages. And the freedoms and advantages refer to this precious human life. If you can view gold and dirt with equanimity and see them as equal, that is a sign of having realized the illusory nature of transcendent things. So the equanimity of looking at things, everything is already pure, the pure view that we talked about at the beginning of this stage of the practice, the Path of Tantra. If you can regard phenomena of samsara as your enemies, that is the sign of crossing over the ocean of suffering.
Are you taping?
Yes, I am. I'm taping. If you can pay meticulous attention to your actions and their effects, adopting virtue and abandoning non-virtue, that is a sign of finding the swift path that ascends the staircase to liberation. And this is a reference to no good, no bad, no attachment, no aversion that we get into with Tantra and particularly later in Dzogchen. If you can purify the negativity, defilements, and habitual tendencies of your body, speech, and mind, that is a sign of closing the door to rebirth in samsara's lower realms. So if we can transcend all of the different negativities, the afflictive emotions, the mental obscurations and so forth associated with body, speech, and mind, and then we purify body, speech, and mind, then we can transcend this cycle of rebirth. If you can keep the three jewels in your mind, the Dharma, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, so that they never separate from it, that is a sign of being hooked by compassion of the supreme refuge. So the three jewels, we take refuge in the three jewels. So when we're able to keep those constantly in mind, then we are hooked, it says here, by the compassion of that supreme refuge. If you know how to integrate emptiness and compassion in your mind stream, which is kind of the highest level, it's often referred to in many of the teachings as the ultimate result of all of this is this union of emptiness and compassion. So we understand all of the different forms of emptiness, and what we call great compassion arises that we feel for all sentient beings, not just human beings, but all forms of human and other sentient beings. And so that is kind of the ultimate. And that is a sign of bringing phenomena into the essence of awakening, the essence of enlightenment. If you can meditate on how all beings have been your parents. Now remember early on we talked about how through this cycle, rebirth over and over again, we imagine that all other sentient beings at some point or other in beginningless time, since we would have had a countless number of rebirths, they would have been our own mother at some point in time, or our parents at some point in time. So as we imagine that, that is a sign of a rising of the sun and the moon of the great vehicle. And I think in that case the sun and the moon are a reference to the compassion and emptiness again. And then if you can dispel the obscurations of the darkness of ignorance, that is a sign of the dawning of clear light with the immaculate space. So once we are able to eliminate the root cause, the fundamental ignorance, then clear light, the ultimate nature of enlightenment, can arise. If you can carry the two accumulations, the accumulations of merit and wisdom, onto the path continuously, that is a sign of maturing of the fruition of the kayas and wisdoms, the kayas being the Buddha bodies, and the wisdoms associated with those. If you can see all that appears and exists arising in the total purity as the Lama, that is a sign of reaching the pinnacle of Dzogchen Yoga. So we look at the Lama as the Buddha. If you can recognize the Vajrakaya of all penetrating pure awareness, that is a sign of transference into the timeless space of primordial purity. So pure awareness is this ultimate, just almost identical to clear light, and the words have slightly different meanings, but in essence it's the ultimate nature of things. So this transference into this space of primordial purity, ultimate. If you can recognize the unity of the three kayas in pure awareness, so the three kayas being the Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, Dharmakaya, that is a sign of the ripening of the fruit, which is Samattabhadra. So Samattabhadra being a personification, if you will, of the ultimate. So those are signs. They're not actually all of ngondro, even though that's the way that they are listed here. But it is in the sense of ngondro when we take that to its ultimate level, because Guru Yoga then enables us to then transcend through the other deity yoga practices, through Dzogchen, where it's very heavily used, and so forth. So in that sense, all of these could be embodied, if you will, within that sense of ngondro, because everything becomes ngondro, if you will. So we're at the end now of part 3, and so we're going to have a little break before we start part 4. And so what I wanted to do is tell you to use this break that we have to do the Guru Yoga and really focus on that. But it's also an opportunity for you, if there are any gaps in your practice, if there was something that we did earlier that you felt that still needed a little bit of work, but because we were moving on, you kind of left it behind. It's an opportunity to go back and look at those things as well. And so take advantage of this time to look at any things that you think could use a little bit of additional work, as well as really focusing on the Guru Yoga, because it's such an important part of the practice. And you can also use the daily practice as a way of getting into the Guru Yoga, since that's the last one on that list. So you can go ahead and do the other ones leading into the Guru Yoga, and then use the Guru Yoga as a way of completing it. So that's kind of your homework assignment during this break, to work on those things. And then in part 4, we will get into the generation stage practices of the Path of Tantra, and look at a number of different deity yoga practices and some of the standard structural formats of those practices and those kinds of things. So enjoy your break.